Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for the 7th of September, 2016. Let's take a look at Newton. Was once a hurricane that hit down in the southern Baja, and it moved up across the Gulf of California into northwest Mexico. Now heavy rain spreading into portions of southern Arizona, and high-level moisture spreading farther to the north. From there, if we look at the radar signature, pretty good rainfall here along the I-10 corridor coming across southern Arizona near Tucson, into the mountains across the region. No doubt some of those dry washes or arroyos will be flowing fast and steady, so watch out for flash flooding in the area. This doesn't look like a high impact event except for maybe localized areas. We were much more worried about Norbert and especially Odile 2 years ago. Hurricane Odile moved up into the area, and it had quite a bit of potential with it, but it turned out to be a pretty big bust for the area, as a good deal of its moisture turned out to come up over into this region instead of over southern Arizona. But that was 2 years ago. This is now, and as it stands, Newton's moisture bringing some much needed rainfall to the area. And if you've ever been out there in their monsoon season, or especially when there's a tropical cyclone dying and spreading its moisture over the region, I was back in 2014 for both of those events, Norbert and Odile. It's amazing. It's like watching geologic time sped up, because the rainfall carves out more of the dry washes and erosion takes place, and it's just super duper fast, as you can imagine, because the rainfall leads to heavy runoff, and then it all dries up and everything gets frozen in time, so to speak, even though it's 150,000 degrees out there sometimes. But it really is an interesting interaction when you have tropical cyclone moisture coming into contact with the geography and the geology of the southwest U.S. Quite an amazing, maybe one day if the hurricanes are not too prevalent in the Atlantic, I can start some kind of a eco tour company where we can go out to the southwest and see dying cyclones in Arizona. It's something to consider. Anyway, in the Atlantic, will there be anything to cover over the next few days? No, it doesn't look like it. Things are pretty quiet right now. This is an interesting tropical wave here. Not quite on the National Hurricane Center's map yet. And certainly they're watching it, but it's not on the Tropical Weather Outlook map. But it is definitely there. Some limited convection with it. Remnants of 92L in here. And everything else is just, you can see there's just these sort of feathery clouds everywhere, but no organized areas of deep thunderstorms, or what we call convection. And looking out to the east, off the coast of Africa, this area is highlighted as having a high chance of developing. I have my doubts, especially over the next several days. Maybe once it gets up into this region, maybe, but something just seems to be off in the Atlantic, and I don't know what it is. This time of year, we are basically right here in the scheme of things, and the peak of the season coming up in 3 days, climatologically speaking. Still a lot of activity to go. There's a secondary peak here in October, and sometimes you can have a very busy end of September into October, especially when the Atlantic is as warm as it is. So maybe things are shifting. I really don't know what's happening. I mean, normally, you get this map here because this time of year, things are normally very busy. September 1st through the 10th is typically a very busy part of the season, and we're just not seeing anything. Can you believe it? We have had nothing form. It's only the first 7 days of September, mind you, but Hermine had already formed by the time we got to September 1st. It became a hurricane on the 31st of August. So we've had no additional formations of any kind in the Atlantic Basin in the busiest month of the hurricane season. So that's kind of odd, especially considering that, look at this, I just couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it. The vertical instability in the tropical Atlantic has reached normal to slightly above normal levels in recent days. After a tremendous plummet to below normal, it rocketed back up here right towards the 1st of September. And now the vertical instability is right where it should be. So why then does this map look like it does? I just don't understand it. Now, vertical instability would be the ability basically of the atmosphere to be unstable. as a simple way to put it. For the air to be able to rise and create convection, you usually have to have cold air over the warm, moist air, and that's been lacking. Well, at least from this chart, unless this is just wrong, the vertical instability is where it needs to be. The wind shear, according to this chart, vertical wind shear, below normal. This black line is your climatological normal, and it's below normal, has been below normal for quite some time. The one thing that is lacking, though, is a large-scale upward motion pattern, or MJO, Madden-Julian oscillation, and the European ECMWF here and its ensemble members show that, and typically it needs to be in phases 1 and 2 for the best Atlantic activity. 8 helps, phases 1 and 2 seem to be the best overall. And right now, it's generally in what we call the null phase, where there's really no appreciable upward motion going on anywhere around the globe. And so we're going to see just this sort of winding down of activity until and unless this pokes its way out either into phases 1 and 2, maybe it goes back over towards 6 and makes the Pacific active again. It's hard to say, but over the next couple of weeks here, at least until the 3rd week of September, the European and all of its ensemble members, they envelope the edge here, so to speak, of all the grouping, and it looks like favoring kind of the Indian Ocean towards the maritime continent, but it's very weak. So in other words, if we saw the MJO come out like this, for example, then we would have a very active period in the Atlantic of probably 2 weeks. And we're not seeing that at all. So it's going to be quiet for a while, it looks like. It wasn't quiet just a little while ago. I wanted to show you this, a couple of screen grabs from the unmanned camera that I set up in Cedar Key, Florida for Hurricane Hermine's arrival this past week. Made landfall there on September the 1st and Thursday night into Friday. So I set the camera up real close to 2 o'clock Eastern Time on Thursday afternoon. And there's the water level at Cedar Key. And the road is nice and clear, just some rainwater on it. It was a little breezy. And then by 12:30 that night, that is the Gulf of Mexico surging in. I mean, absolutely incredible. These big waves coming in. The water level had risen at least 3 feet, if not more. And then on top of that was 2 to 3 foot waves rolling in and just flowing into Cedar Key. If you've ever been there, the center part of town, way off the picture over here, obviously, is lower than the edge. It's kind of weird. You should look at it on a map. So all the water filled up the center part of town, and I really felt bad for those folks when I went back through there later in the day Friday to pick up that camera. If you saw it live on the Weather Channel and on our site, one of these waves brought in a huge piece of deck or something, maybe from over here, broke it off, and it swung around and came right in and hit the camera, knocked it off where I had it mounted, but it stayed on the utility pole. I basically had it on one of these things right here, a big electric pole, but it was sort of half the height. It was a utility pole that was here that had a couple of electric boxes on it, and it was very well anchored into the ground, and it was a great spot to put the camera. And I didn't have to mess with anything that had to do with the utility pole itself. And so it got knocked off, still hung on by the chain that I had put around it, a big steel plastic coated chain, and it was fine. The camera unit was absolutely fine. It just got knocked off, and then the banging around eventually made something disconnect and it went off air. Well, when I went back to get it, just seeing the people having to empty out their businesses and in some cases their homes, bed and breakfasts, etc., putting all their possessions out on the street to be picked up later because it's ruined. It really takes the excitement away very quickly when you see something like that. The ability to be able to study this with something like these unmanned cameras is inherently an exciting prospect. But when you see the results and people's lives ruined, and you know how stressful it is for them, and I'm back here in the comfort of my home and my office, and they're still there dealing with the aftermath, I definitely feel for them. And that picture there is a great example of how storm surge, even when it's not a Katrina event, 28 feet, you only need a few feet, and it can absolutely devastate you personally. And that's all when it's at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. How are these going to affect you? And, certainly your community. But when it affects you directly, it really, that's when hey, I should have been prepared. I mean, what can you do? You live there, you just move? I don't know. I mean, there's not much you can do. Luckily, and I'll get off my soapbox here, these things are fairly few and far between for that area, and they will rebound fairly quickly there, and Cedar Key will return to its absolutely awesome, quaint, and pristine state. All right, well, that's it for me for today. I'll probably wait until Friday unless something pops up tomorrow. There really isn't much to talk about, so let's take a day off, and I'll just kind of chill and spend time with the family or something, and I'll be back on Friday. All right, I am Mark Sept for HurricaneTrack.com. As always, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time and attention, and let's talk again on Friday.